Yokoso o ashitare! Welcome back to another story. How many of you guys are eager to hear epic samurai tales of individual skill and bravery? Because that is what we are going to be going over today. And so, if you like samurai, Japanese history, storytelling, all of that good stuff, please don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, because this is part 2 of what I initially said was going to be a 3-part series, but I think I'm actually going to make it 4 because it's longer than I anticipated. But this is only part 2 of a 4-part series about the former 9 Years' War. And so please subscribe so you can be aware of when new videos in regards to this story drop. And with all of that being said, let's continue where we left off, which was the Emishi chieftain had just been slain by a stray arrow shot at him from the army of the governor of Michinoku, Minamoto no Yoriyoshi. And now, while chieftain Yoritoki had succumbed and passed away, his son was still around. And of course, as per usual, his son then inherited leadership of the Abe clan, of this Emishi Abe clan, and became the new target for the governor. And Governor Yoriyoshi wasted no time in going directly after this man Sadato. He mustered his army together and he immediately set out to attack him. It might have even been in the very same battle that this next part happens. I'm not entirely sure about the history. Again, if you want to know the history about it, please check out the Buyuden Japanese History channel for more information there, or you can look up Wikipedia, is always there. But at any rate, one way or another, Governor Yoriyoshi eventually took his army and confronted the army of Abe no Sadato, the new Emishi chieftain. And now Governor Yoriyoshi was flushed with confidence at his recent victory. He had successfully slain his enemy and things were looking up for him, so he was eager to finish the job and get all of the rewards from the court and spread his fame and his name through all of the country as the greatest warrior that had ever lived in Japan. And maybe it was because of this, maybe it was overconfidence, maybe it was arrogance, maybe he just didn't foresee the problems that awaited him. But Governor Yoriyoshi took his 3,000 men, which was a strong army, don't get me wrong. 3,000 men strong, that's good. There were only 2 problems. The armies of Abe no Sadato numbered 4,000 men, and they were fighting from a defensive position, which is an eminently more advantageous position to be in than attacking. And the text makes no bones about this. Governor Yoriyoshi's army got destroyed, absolutely annihilated. Many men on their side just perished. Now, as far as the details of the battle, the first thing that the text mentions is that it was at this point that Governor Yoriyoshi's son, Yoshiie, proved himself to be one of the most brave, fierce, and capable warriors of any of the men in this army. It says that his arrows seemed to never run out, and every arrow he shot found its mark, and he slew so many Emishi that they all began to flee before him, and none of them could stand up to him. He was godlike in his warrior skills. And because of this, it was here that he was given the nickname Hachiman Taro. Taro meaning firstborn son, and Hachiman meaning the Buddhist Japanese syncretic god of war. And I believe Hachiman is the patron god of the Minamoto clan, which is the clan that these men belonged to. So literally his nickname was firstborn of the god of war, which is, man, you want to talk about really cool nicknames, bro. That's awesome. But while Yoriyoshi was kicking butt and chewing bubblegum, except bubblegum hadn't been invented, the rest of Yoriyoshi's army didn't fare so well. Many of the men ended up being separated off from the governor. The army was broken into little offshoot groups here and there. A bunch of the men managed to escape to safety, but the more part of them ended up succumbing to the enemy and perishing on the battlefield. Now, as for the governor himself, all of the men around him were eventually reduced to 6. So there was him, his son Yoshiie, the firstborn of the god of war, and 5 other men whose names are given, but I'm not going to go into them because it's not just their names that are given, but it's their titles. But these 7 men suddenly found themselves surrounded on all sides by 200 of the enemy. Now again, as far as I can tell, in the rest of the battle, most of Yoriyoshi's army was kind of scattered helter-skelter, so that's why not all 4,000 of these men were trying to attack these 7, but rather there were little pockets of soldiers, little pockets of battle going on here and there all over the place. But as far as the governor and his son and the men around him, they were surrounded again by 200 men, and it says that the arrows came falling in on them like rain. There were so many of them. And Governor Yoriyoshi's horse was actually struck by one of these arrows and died there on the battlefield, leaving him stranded. But not for long, because one of Yoriyoshi's retainers immediately went out, grabbed an enemy, probably slew him, took his horse, and brought it to his lord. So his lord could now be up on a horse, as any proper warrior should be. And now the same thing happened with Yoshiie, his son. Yoshiie's horse, despite all of his bravery, despite all of his skill, was eventually shot out from under him, whereupon a different retainer of theirs immediately went, stole another horse from the enemy, and brought it back to Yoshiie, and got him up on his feet and into fighting position. And thus, these men continued to fight in this manner, sometimes their horses dying, sometimes grabbing a new horse, and fending off every attack from all angles. But no matter what they did, this situation was indeed very, very dire. There was almost no hope of escape. But luckily, by whatever powers that be, and in particular because of the skill of Yoshiie and the fact that all of these men were fighting for their very lives, fighting tooth and nail just to survive, they somehow managed to break the enemy's lines surrounding them and retreat to safety, beaten, bloodied, but altogether alive. But that's not all the story of the battle. Because again, there were pockets of soldiers fighting all over the place, pockets of different samurai engaging in warfare here and there, and the text has stories about several of them. One man in particular, by the name of Saeki no Tsunenori, ended up getting separated from the governor and being in one of these little pockets that was fighting the enemy away from him. And after fending off the enemy for a while and managing to break out of the fray and escaping to a slightly safe distance, he turned around to look for the governor, look for his lord, because he was here and fighting on behalf of him. He wanted to make sure he was okay. But as he looked around, he couldn't see him. They had been separated and he didn't know where the governor was. And so now he turned to look for any of his allies that may have gotten out like he did and were still alive. Sure enough, he found a few of them, and he went to them and he asked them, "Hey, do you guys know where the governor is? What happened?" And eventually one of these scattered allies told him, "Bro, the governor is surrounded by the enemy on all sides, by a huge number of them, and the men directly around him have been whittled down to just a few. I'm gonna be honest, dude, I don't see how he gets out of this. I don't think he's gonna make it." And Tsunenori, upon hearing this, immediately announced to everybody around him in a very grave, dignified, but determined voice. He said, "I have served the governor for over 30 years, and I am an old man. The governor himself is also no young man either. And yet, after faithfully serving him for so long, how could I not go to his aid and die alongside him?" And saying no more, he instantly turned his horse around and he sprinted dead on right into the middle of the enemies and back into the fray. Now the thing about this warrior is he was of some standing, so he himself had some retainers underneath him. And some of his retainers had managed to make it out of the fighting with him. And when they heard him say this and saw him dive headfirst back into the enemy, they also said amongst themselves, "Our Lord has already declared that he intends to die with the governor. And we, as his warriors, how could we stand to be in this world without him?" And thus, coming to an agreement, these three men also followed their lord, Tsunenori, back into the fray, and they began fighting like demons. They exerted all of their powers, they did everything that they could, and together they managed to slay 10 more enemies. But unfortunately, the enemy outnumbered them so greatly that it was inevitable that they would, and they certainly did, fall in battle. Now another reputable warrior of mention was a guy by the name of Fujiwara no Kagesue, and he was the son of Fujiwara no Kagemichi. I don't know why that's relevant, but it's in there. And he was a young man, only about 20 years old, maybe a little bit older, but not much older than 20. And he was so skilled at fighting that what he would do is he would ride his horse right into the middle of all of the enemies, shoot a bunch of them with his arrows, because at this time samurai weren't actually well known for sword fighting, they were much more better known for horseback archery, and he would shoot several enemies, slay them, level them, and then he would make it out in one piece, only so he could turn back around, dive back into the middle of the fray, and repeat this process over and over and over again. And he did this about 7 or 8 times. 7 to 8 times he jumped into the middle of all of the enemies, took out a bunch of them, and then escaped. But again, the enemy outnumbered the governor's army so much that it was really just a matter of time. And eventually, this Kagesue's horse was shot out from under him, he hit the dirt, went rolling, and the enemy closed in on him. Now the text does say that Abe no Sadato's men were somewhat reluctant to take the life of this young man because this young man had just proven that he was extremely brave and extremely skilled, one of the greatest warriors that any of them had ever seen. But the fact still remained that he was not only the enemy, but he was one of the enemy's most important, closest fighters, one of his best men. And so, war being what it is, they also took his life as well. And so, in this way, despite Governor Yoriyoshi's men doing their best, fighting to their utmost, tooth and nail to survive, most of them ended up perishing on the battlefield. But there was one other guy that is worth mentioning, a man by the name of Fujiwara no Shigeyori, and he was particularly close with the governor. I don't know what relationship he had, but it does say that he was some sort of close relation, either maybe possibly a blood relation, or maybe he just got along with him really, really well. But he was one of those men who managed to make it out of this battle alive. And a few days after this whole kerfuffle ended, he was sitting there weeping because he had been one of those guys that got separated from the governor and didn't know where he went. And so a few days after this whole thing happened, he was sure, he was certain that his lord had perished in the fighting. And so while in the clutches of grief, he decided that he wanted to go back to the battlefield and get his lord's body so he could give it a proper burial. The only problem was, Abe no Sadato's men were not letting anybody on the battlefield except for Buddhist priests to perform whatever rites and rituals for the pacification of the dead. And so it was then and there that this Shigeyori decided that he was going to shave his head, he was going to don the robes of the Buddhist priesthood, put behind him any and all worldly affairs, just so he could make it to the battlefield, find the body of his governor, of his lord, and give him a proper send-off. His commitment to his lord was so great that he thought that that was the best thing for him to do. However, on the path to the battlefield, wouldn't you know it, he happens to run into his lord, the governor, Minamoto no Yoriyoshi. And when he met the governor again, he was at first extremely related. Like, his relief, his joy was boundless. He couldn't put it into words, it was so great. But that joy was coupled with a very bitter and terrible sadness. Because although he was glad that his lord was alive, again, bloodied, beaten, and worse for wear, but alive, they had lost this battle. Many and many of their brothers in arms, many of their friends had perished in the fighting, and they had not accomplished what they set out to do. They had lost. And so, in a really weird way, with both a sense of huge relief and also extreme grief, these men all returned back to the governor's office in Michinoku. And on that note, I think that is the most appropriate place to end this story for now. So just to recap, Governor Yoriyoshi successfully put down the first Emishi chieftain, Abe no Yoritoki. However, Yoritoki's son, the guy whom Yoriyoshi believed was the one who actually started this whole war by attacking his men on the banks of the Yakuri River, this Abe no Sadato had defeated Governor Yoriyoshi's army soundly. And while the governor made it out alive, he now needed to retreat, to lick his wounds, and recuperate before he could do anything. And that is exactly what he does. But again, this war is far from over, so please stick around, subscribe to the channel so you can be here for when the new videos about that war and the conclusion to it drops, because oh boy, he comes back with a vengeance. Trust me, it's kind of insane. So if you enjoyed that story, please give the video a like and please subscribe to the channel so you can be made aware of when the new videos for this drop. And if you've been watching all the way up until the end, I want to thank you sincerely. Ito kateji ke no koso haberi kere, and hopefully we will see you for part 3 of the former 9 Years' War. Goodbye, everybody.